Ever get lost in a crowd? You know that feeling, whether it's a packed concert or a hushed theater, being surrounded by others just hits differently. And today, we're diving deep into that very feeling, exploring the world of crowds and power through the lens of Elias Canetti's Crowds and Power.
You've given us quite the task with this one.
Right.
Canetti's crowds and power, the whole thing. But hey, we've sifted through all 450 plus pages, and we've got the most intriguing bits.
That's right. We're on a mission to figure out what makes crowds tick, why we're drawn to them, the different forms they take, and how they shape power.
Canetti, he doesn't just describe crowds. He digs into, like, those primal forces that bring people together, whether it's for good or, well, not so good.
So let's start with that magnetic pull. Why are we drawn to crowds? What's so compelling about being in that throng of people?
Canetti says it's basic human nature, a deep-seated need for unity, for belonging. Even if it's temporary, being part of a crowd lets us kind of go beyond our individual selves and tap into something bigger.
Like when you're at a game and your team scores the winning point, and suddenly you're high-fiving strangers, chanting with everyone else, and riding this wave of pure joy.
Exactly. Or think about a powerful ritual like the haka, the merry war dance. Those synchronized movements, the chanting, the sheer energy, it's all about unity and strength. But here's where Canetti's analysis gets really interesting. He doesn't just talk about crowds in general. He identifies specific types, each with its own triggers and goals.
So it's not just one big homogenous group. There are, different flavors of crowds.
Exactly. Think about the baiting crowd, for instance. This type thrives on a shared aggression, a need to kind of unleash on a common enemy. It shows how mob mentality can take over.
Okay, that one's a little unnerving. It reminds me of those historical accounts of public executions. The crowd becomes this single entity driven by, well, almost a bloodlust. And it's hard to tell where individual responsibility ends and collective action begins.
You got it. Then there's the flight crowd, united not by aggression but by fear, that desperate need to escape danger. Imagine a fire or a natural disaster. Individual fear explodes in a crowd, leading to that chaotic scramble for safety.
That makes me think about how things go viral online. One minute it's a rumor, the next it's mass panic on social media, everyone sharing and reacting. It's like that digital version of a flight crowd driven by a perceived threat.
That's a sharp observation. You can see the parallels, even online. But let's move on to another type, the prohibition crowd. This one's all about defiance, a collective no, pushing back against rules or norms they reject.
This is where it gets empowering. It's like a worker strike. That solidarity of standing together, saying enough, and demanding better. There's real power in that united refusal to back down.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is how this defiance connects to Canetti's larger point about power itself. You can't really understand one without the other.
So it's not just about analyzing crowds on their own, it's about how they play into the very nature of power.
You got it. Canetti believes that power, at its core, comes from survival, that feeling of strength from outliving your enemies. He even ties this to the idea of a ruler amassing a symbolic heap of the dead. Enemies defeated, rivals gone away to show off their power, to make it clear they're the ones who survive.
It's like that old saying, to the victor go the spoils, but it's deeper than that, right? It's about that human need to not just survive, but to be seen as a survivor, to have that power acknowledged.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not just about having power. It's about showing it off, making sure it's recognized, even feared. And this is where Canetti's ideas about command come in.
Okay, let's explore that. How does Canetti connect, say, a ruler making a decree to what we see happening in a crowd?
He goes all the way back to, like, the animal world. Think of a predator's growl and how it makes his prey run. That basic interaction, Canetti says, is the root of command.
So there's this almost instinctive reaction to displays of power that goes beyond rational thought and taps into something much deeper.
Exactly. And we see it all the time, even today. Think about a charismatic leader giving a speech. Their words are like commands, shaping feelings, directing energy, influencing what people do.
It's like that magnetic pull we talked about earlier, but cranked up. And it makes me think about how easily that power can be used, for good or for bad. You know, a leader who can inspire a nation to work together can just as easily manipulate those same emotions for their own benefit.
That's exactly right. And this leads us to one of Canetti's most, well, unsettling points, the link he makes between people in power and people experiencing paranoia.
Okay, that sounds pretty intense. Can you explain that? What's the connection between rulers and paranoia?
Canetti argues they're both consumed by this need for control. They're suspicious of everyone, always trying to hold on to their power no matter what, seeing threats everywhere, whether they're real or imagined, constantly on guard against any challenge to their authority.
So it's like, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. That burden of power, that constant worry about losing it, can distort even the best leader into someone paranoid, maybe even tyrannical.
Exactly. And to show this, Canetti looks at how people use transformation to navigate power. He delves into the idea of masks, both literal and metaphorical, and how they let us take on different roles and use power in ways we might not be able to otherwise.
It's like that saying, all the world's a stage, isn't it? We all wear masks to some extent, acting differently depending on the situation. But Canetti's saying that masks can be a way to gain and hold on to power.
Exactly. Think about those old rituals where dancers wore these elaborate masks to become like gods or spirits. It's a powerful kind of transformation, blurring the line between human and divine. Putting on the mask, they tap into a source of authority beyond just themselves.
It's like they're channeling a power bigger than them, using the symbolism and stories tied to those figures. And it makes me think about how we still see this today, even if it's not always a literal mask. Politicians, celebrities, influencers, they all create certain images and personas to project power and influence.
That's a great point. And Canetti connects this transformation idea directly to early kingship. He says that the power of early rulers was often about how well they could embody the spirit of their people. They were seen as living symbols of their society's hopes and fears.
So the king wasn't just a political leader, but almost a sacred figure, embodying their entire culture. And to keep that power, they constantly had to reinforce that link to the divine, to the collective.
Exactly. And this brings up another fascinating, though kind of unsettling point. The lengths power structures will go to stay in control, even if it means extreme measures. Canetti talks about the ritual killing of aging kings in some cultures as an example of this.
Wow, that's pretty intense. Can you tell me more about that?
In these cultures, power was all about vitality, strength. Any sign of weakness, even just getting old, could threaten a ruler's authority.
Yeah.
So instead of letting the king become a symbol of decline, they would be ritually killed, making sure the image of power stayed young and strong.
It's a stark reminder that power dynamics throughout history and even now aren't always, pretty. But it makes me think Canetti focuses a lot on physical crowds, but we do so much online now. Do his theories still apply when we're talking about online communities, social media, all of that?
That's the big question, isn't it? Canetti couldn't have predicted the internet and the virtual crowds we see every day. And that's what makes his work even more interesting.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. Let's get into that. We're talking online forums, social media platforms, these huge digital spaces where people gather, talk, even create movements. It's like the public square is online now.
You got it. And it makes you wonder, do Canetti's ideas about crowds and power still work in the digital world? How do we understand things like viral trends, cancel culture, echo chambers through what he was saying?
It's kind of wild, right? How these online spaces, they tap into those same basic instincts Canetti was talking about, even though he wrote this way before the internet.
It really is. Take that idea of the baiting crowd, for example. Almost like he predicted the internet age with that one.
Oh, absolutely. The way outrage explodes online, it's uncanny. Someone posts something controversial and boom, it's like a digital mob descends, everyone trying to be the most outraged.
It's that same need for a common enemy, that shared aggression, but amplified by the internet's speed and anonymity.
And then you've got that flight crowd thing happening with the viral trends and FOMO, that fear of missing out.
Exactly. That feeling that you got to jump on board, share the latest meme, or you're out of the loop.
It's like that digital version of everyone rushing for the exit, but instead of danger, they're chasing online validation.
And we can't forget the prohibition crowd, that power of collective pushback.
Right. Online petitions, social media campaigns, even just a hashtag, they can all become this rallying cry for change.
It's the ability to mobilize huge groups of people around a shared issue, to challenge those in power, to say, we won't be silenced. That's what makes these online spaces so powerful.
It's like Canetti gave us this roadmap, not just for understanding physical crowds from the past, but for decoding the virtual ones shaping our world right now.
And that's what keeps his work so relevant. It's not just about crowds themselves, it's about recognizing those same urges in ourselves, that pull towards unity, the desire for power, the fear of losing control.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to human nature, showing us both the good and the, well, The not so good.
Exactly. And we can't shy away from those uncomfortable truths. We need to understand how crowds and power work online and offline if we want to navigate this complex world more consciously and hopefully make better choices.
So as we wrap up, what's the key takeaway here? What should we all be thinking about as we log off and head back into the real world?
For me, it's that reminder that power itself isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used to build or to destroy. The real test is recognizing those basic urges in ourselves, how they come out in our interactions with others, and trying our best to use whatever influence we have responsibly.
It's an ongoing process of self-awareness, of critical thinking, but it's so essential in a world increasingly shaped by crowds, both physical and virtual.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
Well, that's our deep dive into the captivating and sometimes unsettling world of crowds and power. We looked at what draws people together, the different types of crowds, and the complex ways power shows up, both in person and online.
We covered a lot, but hopefully you're leaving with a new appreciation for how relevant Canetti's work still is, and a better understanding of the forces shaping us, individually and collectively.
As always, keep the conversation going. Explore Canetti's crowds and power. Pay attention to how crowds work in your own life, and never stop questioning how power operates in the world around you. Thanks for joining us.